Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Æthelstan, The Making of England. This is by Tom Holland and is part of this series that discusses monarchs in England. So Æthelstan is an individual who is given the first name as the first king of England, so the first individual to hold that title, and really had an influential mark on history, and yet he's not really a well-known or household name in the way that maybe future kings are. And I think he's a very intriguing figure, and I have to admit that I knew nothing about him before reading this book, so I decided to check this book out and kind of fill that gap. The cover looks like this. There is an overleaf that goes over top of it, but the library did remove it. We just have this coin here with his name on it and his name here. And on the back, they do have the dates that he reigned, because this is part of a series. So I'm going to talk about what this book covers and a brief history of the life of Æthelstan, so you can determine if this is a book that you would be interested in reading. I'll also provide some brief thoughts on what I thought about the book. So let's dive in. So as mentioned, Æthelstan, a very important figure. He's the first individual to get that title, King of England. So he's the first King of England, and he did a lot for the history of England, but he's almost completely forgotten to history. Now this could be my bias. I live in the United States, so while I did take world history, and I also had to take a whole British literature course in addition to my American literature course in high school, I did not have dedicated British history for years on end, as I'm sure people who go through the education system in the UK do. So maybe he's more well known to individuals in the UK. I'm not sure. If you are from the UK, please let me know if that is something that's taught, but he was certainly unknown to me. And I do enjoy history, so I probably have slightly more historical knowledge than the average person. Unknown to me. But this book really backs up two kings, or two major figures, really to get us started. So this whole family starts off with, well, doesn't start, but one of the key figures in this family who's the grandfather of Æthelstan is Alfred the Great. Alfred the Great is probably a name that's known to you. He's very influential. He's able to fight Vikings. He's able to prompt reforms, and he is a king for a kingdom in Britain. So this island is not unified in any sense of the word. There's a lot of different kingdoms that sometimes work together and sometimes fight each other. They also have common enemies like the Vikings who exist, and there's a lot of people who are trying to kind of jostle for their place on the island, and Alfred the Great is one of them. Upon Alfred the Great's death, and after his influential reign, he hands the reins over to his son Edward. So Edward is where things start, because a key feature of this is succession and how Æthelstan even became king, because that was not a given. Edward had a wife whose name was Ecgwin, and they have Æthelstan. So Æthelstan is the firstborn son. However, Edward, while doing his political machinations and doing everything he does as king, and he had a lot of benefits from having Alfred the Great as a father, but he's doing his own thing. He has to think about who his wives are and who his sons are and who's most politically convenient. Well, apparently it was no longer politically convenient to have Ecgwin as a wife, because she was shipped off to a convent, and Edward decides to marry Elfled. There's a lot of names here, so let's try to keep up. Elfled, who has a child, Elfweird. So Elfweird is a son, so that would be Æthelstan's half-brother, technically. At this point, it is politically expedient, I guess, to have Elfweird be the heir, or the primary son, and this comes back to how succession was managed at this time. So Æthelstan is shipped off. So just because you are the oldest son does not give you special permissions. At this time, succession was kind of just a matter of picking the best candidate from a pool. So it made sense for a king to have a lot of sons, which, if my extensive experience playing Crusader Kings is any help, I do not like having a lot of sons, because they tend to become problems. When one of them is made king, there's usually a lot of brothers who are also very interested in taking the throne. And this plays from the historical fact that a king might have multiple sons, and you have to do something with those sons, or they might become problems for the heir. And at this point in time, it seems like the heir was not necessarily a given, that the oldest son was going to be that. It was an option. You have lots of sons. And Ecgwin had a lower status than his next wife, so maybe her son should take priority. And we see that in charters or things that are signed around this time, where Elfweird, gotta get these names right, is signed above, his name is signed above Æthelstan, signifying his importance overwards. Æthelstan is shuffled off from Wessex, which is his kingdom, to Mercia, where his aunt, whose name is Æthelfled, is kind of managing things. Æthelfled is married to a man, but he's much older, and Æthelfled in and of herself was an interesting character. I would love to read a whole book on her. But Æthelstan, being the son of a wife who's kind of been shuffled off, now has to go have his upbringing in Mercia, which winds up being an advantage because now he has connections to both Wessex and Mercia. So he's learning from his aunt, he's seeing how things are done there. I did want to take a moment to read something I thought was funny from this book. So Wessex was trying to position itself as very important, and they were also trying to position themselves as Christian. This was very important at this time. Let me get the right sticky note. So Wessex was trying to find some connections to biblical figures. And I'm going to read this paragraph that starts on page 20. What though, if the role of Æthelstan's forebears in God's plan had been of greater significance than a mere cursory glance at the history of Wessex might suggest? So Wessex, as a court, is trying to find out how important they are. Scholars at the West Saxon court, eager to trace his ancestry back to Adam, had seized upon one particular intriguing aspect of his genealogy. Woden, so it was recorded during Alfred's reign, had been the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of a man named Seath. Various stories were told of this enigmatic figure, that as a child he had drifted in from the seas on an otherwise empty boat, that he had been raised by those who found him, that he had ended up a great king. Now, though, thanks to the researches undertaken at Alfred's court, the truth could finally be told. Seath had been the son of Noah, though he had failed to feature in the Bible, was merely a detail, which I thought was awfully convenient. Oh, actually, there was another son of Noah, and he was our ancestor. Very important. So we can see Wessex is trying to build their importance. Wessex really rose to prominence after Mercia, if I'm remembering my introduction to Anglo-Saxon Britain correctly. So Wessex is really powerful, but by Æthelstan going to Mercia, he has a connection there as well, which is helpful and will come in handy. Edward dies, and that's very sad, of course, but that leads to a lot of questions, because now Æthelstan, on page 47, finally gets his day in the sun. And as mentioned, just because you were the eldest son of a king does not mean that you were going to be the next king. So as we see here on page 25, over the long course of West Saxon history, the throne had frequently passed from uncle to nephew, from brother to brother, from cousin to cousin. Alfred's father had been the first son of a king to succeed directly to the throne in almost 200 years. Ultimately, it was the consensus of the great men of the kingdom and the acclamation of the people that served to raise the Ætheling to the throne of Wessex and secure his legitimacy. Not even a ruler as admired as Alfred could take for granted that his eldest son would succeed him by right. So upon Edward's death, there's two real contenders. There's Æthelstan, who's easily able to take control in Mercia. He was raised there, he has support there, but he needs to get control of Wessex as well, where, hold on, the name, Elfweird is believed to really take control. However, Elfweird does not live very long. Elfweird, my sticky note fell out. I'm very sorry about that. Elfweird is taking control of Wessex, and he may have actually been in charge of Wessex, but he actually wound up dying 3 weeks after his father did. And it's actually not believed to be suspicious, which, if it's not suspicious, is one of those things in history that is awfully convenient. And it's possible. This is not the first awfully convenient death that occurs during Æthelstan's reign. However, this one, I guess, is not believed to be suspicious. So within 3 weeks, Elfweird is dead, and that means that Æthelstan, the names are certainly getting to me, Æthelstan can take control of both Mercia and Wessex. Another key thing that occurred is the transition from a consecration to a coronation. So Æthelstan is the first person, and this is covered on page 51, to be crowned. So now with the lowering onto Æthelstan's head a crown, a touch of Rome had been brought to the banks. Consecration had been rendered a coronation. That's the phrase I'm looking for. Consecration had been rendered a coronation. So previously you were just consecrated, but I guess he liked what Charlemagne was doing, so he decided to be coronated, and the coronation is a key aspect, or something that comes with a lot of pomp and ceremony, even to this day. So at this point, Æthelstan is in charge. Elfweird is dead, and he can now take control of these two kingdoms. So as king, he fights Viking invaders. There's a phrase that's used in this book where the Vikings are described as a hydra-headed opponent, which it does seem to be the case. They pop up somewhere and they pop up somewhere else and they pop up somewhere else because you're not really dealing with them at the source. So I think that was a very good way to phrase it. But he's also bringing a lot of these lower rulers or local rulers under his control. Most notably, he forced the King of the Scots to submit to him, although that did not last long after his death. In incorporating a number of these local people to at least listen to him or forced to attend his courts or what he needs to do, he is able to secure the title of first king of England. And this is really notable because there was no, sometimes when you look back at history, it's like, well, this is how things had to happen, but it didn't have to happen that way. Maybe if he had been less successful or if his brother, what if Elfweird had survived, maybe he would have lost to Elfweird. Maybe he could have been Elfweird, but that would have taken too much time. Who knows what would have happened? So there is no had to the King of England. There's nothing that said that had to occur. So it is just interesting how he was able to do this. He was also able to accomplish a lot because he had a whole slew of sisters that he could marry off, which is very convenient in the Middle Ages. And he did a lot of things that were non-military as well. He was very focused on law code and making sure that laws were fair. He seemed to have a lot of moral guilt about things like executing very young people we would consider children today, like 13 and 14, you could be executed for stealing, and he wanted that raised to 15. So he felt a lot of guilt about maybe executing people too young for crimes, but also didn't want to encourage crime to occur. He issued coinage, and he did a number of other things to just secure the realm and keep it all together. There was another convenient death. He had a troublesome relative named Edwin who perishes off the coast in a drowning. Again, not believed to be suspicious, although what he was doing in the water, I think maybe was suspicious. That was another convenient factor, someone else eliminated. Æthelstan did not marry, he did not have a wife, and he did not have any sons. So that meant that upon his death, there were no sons fighting, although there was plenty of family members who were very interested in his kingdom. So in 939, back in the book, he dies, and he is remembered today as being the first king of England. And upon his death, his, I believe it was half-brother, Edmund, takes the throne, and things continue on from there. Overall, I really like Tom Holland's style. That's the author here. I like the way he was able to incorporate text from the sources into the work, and it flowed really, really well. It wasn't dry. It wasn't academic, at least to me personally. Maybe other people do find it academic, but I actually really enjoyed this one. I found it quite readable, and I was really interested in intrigued to be introduced to these people who I didn't know a lot about. So yeah, I really enjoyed Æthelstan. I enjoyed reading about him in this book. I don't know, I guess I don't know if I personally would have enjoyed Æthelstan. Maybe he had a bad personality or we wouldn't agree on things, but I found it very enjoyable to read this book, and I learned quite a lot. And the author's right. It's a name that wasn't familiar to me, even though he's called the first king of England. So now I am more familiar with him, and I'm glad to have been introduced to him through this book. Let me know if you've read this book, if you have any thoughts on this book. Please let me know. I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.